They said it was an accident. I said it was murder. The bullet that tore through Maya Daniels on that cold October night wasn't just a piece of metal, it was history, prejudice, and centuries of violence compressed into one split second. And now, the man who fired at Officer Grant Keaton was about to face the kind of trial no police officer in this country had ever endured. The irony? The man presiding over that trial was the very person whose daughter he killed. You could feel it in the air the moment the trial began. Not just tension, this was heavier, denser, like the courtroom itself might split under the weight of everything unspoken. Outside, protesters packed the courthouse steps, chanting her name, Maya, Maya, Maya. Judge Samuel Daniels sat high on the bench, his robe as black as the grief that had swallowed him whole. His eyes, usually steady, calm, the eyes of a man who had weathered decades of hard cases, were now two storms barely restrained by law and procedure. He wasn't allowed to preside over his own daughter's case. Every rule of judicial ethics forbade it. But this was no ordinary trial, and Daniels was no ordinary judge. With every legal avenue exhausted, the Chief Justice had made a historic exception. Sam Daniels would be the one to pass judgment on the man who took his child's life. Maya had been 22, a graduate student in civil rights law, the kind of young woman who still believed she could change the world. That night, she was walking home from her internship, her phone in her hand, earbuds in, humming along to some old Stevie Wonder track. Officer Keaton claimed he thought she matched the description of an armed robbery suspect, a tall black male in a dark hoodie. Maya was 5'4", wearing a bright yellow coat. Keaton's story shifted like sand in the wind. First, she reached into her bag too quickly. Then, the streetlight was too dim. Then, his radio static made him nervous. But when the footage surfaced grainy, shaky, captured from across the street, it told its own truth. Maya's hands were empty when he shot her. The public outrage was instant and relentless. Within days, Keaton was arrested, charged not just with manslaughter, but with second-degree murder. Then came the twist that shocked even seasoned legal analysts. The district attorney added a new enhancement: racially motivated aggravated homicide, a statute rarely invoked and never successfully prosecuted against a police officer. If convicted, Keaton wouldn't just serve life without parole. He could become the first officer in state history sentenced under a law that treated racially motivated killings by law enforcement as capital crimes. The morning of the trial's opening statements, the courthouse felt like a fortress. Barricades lined the steps. National Guard stood watch. Every seat inside was filled: civil rights leaders, law students, grieving families from other police shootings, off-duty cops with folded arms and grim expressions. Keaton sat at the defense table, his uniform traded for a dark suit that didn't fit quite right. His hair was neatly combed, his posture rigid, but his hands wouldn't stop twitching. Across the aisle, the prosecution table was stacked with binders and evidence folders. Lead prosecutor Adrienne Colesharp, unflinching, a black woman in her 40s, leaned forward, eyes locked on the jury like a hawk about to dive. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case is not about a mistake. It's about a decision. A decision made in less than 2 seconds. Yes, but 2 seconds built on years of training, bias, and a belief that some lives are worth more than others." Every word landed like a hammer. Keaton's lawyer, Robert Vance, countered with the usual defense: fear, confusion, a dangerous neighborhood, an honest cop doing his best in a bad situation. He spoke smoothly, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. But when he said, "Officer Keaton deeply regrets what happened," Maya's mother audibly scoffed from the gallery. Daniels didn't react, not outwardly. But if you knew him, really knew him, you could see the tightening of his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. The first witness was a woman named Delilah Torres, who lived in the apartment above the street where Maya was shot. Her testimony cut through the courtroom like glass. She'd heard the siren, looked out her window, and saw Maya standing still, her hands up, tears streaming down her face. Then came the shot. She didn't move, Delilah said, voice trembling. She didn't reach for nothing. She just looked scared, and then she fell. The jurors shifted uncomfortably. Even Keaton's lawyer avoided eye contact. Next came the body cam footage. The judge's clerk dimmed the lights, and the grainy video filled the screen. The courtroom went silent except for the crackle of radio chatter, the thud of footsteps, and Keaton's voice barking. "Stop. Hands up." Maya's voice calm, almost pleading, answered, "I'm just walking home." Then the shot. Some people in the gallery gasped. Maya's mother turned away, shoulders shaking. Daniels didn't blink. When the lights came back on, the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just grief, Anna Maria, it was rage, tightly coiled, waiting for release. The trial was only beginning, but already, the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about justice for Maya anymore. This was about whether the system itself was willing to hold its own enforcers accountable, not in theory, not in headlines, but in a courtroom where the truth had nowhere to hide. And everyone knew that by the time the gavel fell for the last time, history would remember exactly what happened in this room. The defense opened its case with an expert in police procedure, a retired captain named Harold Mercer, white-haired, deep-voiced, a man who'd clearly spent decades being listened to without question. He explained split-second decision-making in law enforcement, citing scenarios where hesitation meant death. The officer's training, Mercer said, is to neutralize a threat before that threat can harm others or the officer himself. In high-crime areas, that threshold for action is necessarily lower. Adrienne Cole rose slowly for cross-examination, her heels clicking like punctuation across the courtroom floor. "Captain Mercer," she began, her tone deceptively polite, "are you aware of the distance between Officer Keaton and Maya Daniels at the moment he fired?" "Approximately 8 feet, Mercer replied. "And in those 8 feet, what weapon did she have?" "She did not have a weapon. So no gun, no knife, not even a rock." "No." Cole took a slow step forward. "Do you believe, Captain, that a trained officer armed, with body armor, with backup on the way should be so threatened by an unarmed, 22-year-old woman in a bright yellow coat that he must kill her?" Mercer shifted. "I'm saying, no, Captain," Cole interrupted sharply. "I'm asking." There was a pause long enough for the jury to feel the discomfort. "No," Mercer admitted finally. Cole let the silence hang before returning to her table. It was a small victory, but in trials like this, small victories could snowball. On the third day, the prosecution called their most controversial witness, a fellow police officer named Derek Lowe. Black, mid-30s, and still in uniform, Lowe had been Keaton's partner for 2 years. The moment he walked in, the tension in the courtroom doubled. Cops testifying against cops was nearly unheard of. Lowe's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the edges of the witness stand like he was bracing against a storm. "We'd had conversations about certain neighborhoods," Lowe said. "Keaton, he saw threats where there weren't any, especially with young black men. Or women." The defense objected instantly, but Daniels overruled. Lowe continued, his words slicing cleanly. "The night Maya was killed, I told him over the radio, that's not our suspect. That's a woman in a yellow coat." He didn't acknowledge. A second later, I heard the shot. In the gallery, someone let out a low, audible curse. Vance, the defense attorney, tried to paint Lowe as disgruntled, resentful, maybe even jealous. But Lowe's composure never cracked. "No, sir," Lowe said firmly. "This isn't about me not liking him. This is about a young woman who should still be alive." By now, the media coverage had reached a fever pitch. Every night, news anchors replayed the courtroom footage, while outside, the chants grew louder. "No more. Justice now." Social media burned with debates, some defending Keaton as a good cop who made a tragic mistake, others calling him the embodiment of systemic racism. Old videos of him making offhand remarks about thugs resurfaced. Someone leaked his disciplinary file for prior complaints for excessive force, all dismissed without consequence. Daniels read none of it. Or at least, he pretended not to. In truth, each headline was another brick in the wall of fury inside him. But he was still a judge, bound to the law, and the law demanded control. When it was Keaton's turn to take the stand, the room became so quiet it was like the building itself was holding its breath. He looked smaller up there, not the uniformed figure of authority, but a man whose career and possibly his freedom was slipping away. His voice wavered at first, but he steadied it, locking eyes with the jurors. "I thought she had a gun," Keaton said. "I wish to God I'd been wrong. But in that moment, I truly believed I was about to be shot." Cole approached with a photograph in her hand, a still from the bodycam footage showing Maya's empty hands. She placed it on the evidence screen so the jury could see every pixel. "Officer Keaton," she said softly. Is this the moment before you fired? Yes. And where is the gun? Keaton stared at the screen for a long time. There wasn't one, he said finally. Cole let the silence do the work. By the end of the week, the case had transformed. This wasn't just a story of a single night, a single bullet. It was a referendum on an entire culture, the unwritten rules that let officers walk free after killing unarmed black people. And now, for the first time, the system seemed poised to break that cycle. The jury would deliberate soon. Everyone knew their verdict would send a message far beyond these walls. And Judge Samuel Daniels, the father, the jurist, the man standing at the exact point where justice and vengeance collided, would have to decide how history would remember them all. The jury was sequestered in a conference room on the top floor of the courthouse. No phones, no outside news, just 12 people with stacks of exhibits, the judge's instructions, and the weight of a nation watching. From the moment the bailiff closed the door, the debate ignited. He shot an unarmed girl, one juror said flatly. On camera. What else do we need to know? Another, older man shook his head. You can't just convict someone of murder because it looks bad on video. He said he was afraid for his life. A woman in the corner leaned forward. Afraid? She was half his size and wearing yellow. This isn't fear. This is bias. That's the whole point of the new statute. Back and forth they went, voices rising, tempers fraying. Outside, hours passed. In the gallery below, Maya's parents sat in the front row, silent, waiting for the knock on the door that would signal a verdict. Daniel sat in his chambers, refusing food, rereading the statutes he knew by heart. By the second day of deliberations, word leaked unofficially that the jury was split. 6 wanted the maximum, guilty on all counts, including the racial motivation enhancement. 4 wanted guilty on the lesser charge of manslaughter. 2 were undecided, drifting in the storm between sympathy for the family and fear of setting a precedent that would shake law enforcement to its core. It was the young juror 25, Latino, first time on a jury, who broke the stalemate. He stood up, voice trembling but clear. My cousin was killed like this, he said. No charges, no trial. We all said it would never change. But this is our chance to make it change. If we let him off easy, we're saying the law doesn't apply to everyone. And I'm not going to be that person. One by one, the others began to move. By nightfall, the 4-person pressed the buzzer for the bailiff. We have a verdict. The courtroom was packed when the jury filed back in. Daniels returned to the bench, his face carved from stone. The 4-persona middle-aged black woman with a steady gaze stood to read. We, the jury, find the defendant, Grant Keaton, guilty of second-degree murder. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Guilty of racially motivated aggravated homicide under Statute 14-92. Gasps. Then cheers from the protesters outside, faint but unmistakable. Keaton closed his eyes. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, whispering something neither the microphones nor the cameras could catch. Sentencing was set for 1 week later. That week felt like a year. The streets outside the courthouse became a protest site, a memorial, and a battleground all at once. Supporters of the verdict brought flowers, candles, posters with Maya's face. Opponents held "Support Our Police" signs, chanting that Keaton was a scapegoat. In interviews, Daniels remained silent, refusing to speak about the case until it was fully concluded. But inside, he was at war with himself. The law allowed him to impose the harshest sentence in the statute, life, without parole, plus a capital penalty. But was that justice, or vengeance wearing justice's mask? The day of sentencing, Daniels walked into the courtroom to find both sides glaring at each other across the aisle. The gallery was silent except for the faint rustle of clothes and the scratching of reporters' pens. Keaton stood at the defense table, pale and exhausted. His lawyer asked for leniency, citing his years of service, his family, his lack of prior convictions. Then Adrienne Cole rose. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady but edged with fire. This was not an accident. It was the predictable outcome of bias, negligence, and the belief that a black life was worth less than an officer's fear. The statute exists for this very reason, to send a message that we will not excuse such acts. We ask for the maximum sentence the law allows. Daniels looked down at the file in front of him, but the words blurred. In his mind, he saw Maya, 6 years old, running down their driveway, calling, "Daddy, watch me." before she jumped into his arms. He saw her at 18, cap and gown, telling him she wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And he saw her body in the hospital bed, the stillness where her laughter used to be. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it was audible. "Officer Keaton, the jury has found you guilty on all counts. The law demands that I sentence you accordingly. But I will also say this. The uniform you wore is supposed to protect the innocent. You turned it into a weapon of fear." He paused, the silence stretching until it seemed the walls themselves leaned in. "I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, under Statute 14-92, I impose the enhancement penalty, death by lethal injection." The room erupted half in cheers, half in outrage. Keaton's lawyer shouted an objection that was drowned out by the noise. Daniels banged the gavel once. "This court is adjourned." Outside, the protests became a roar. Some hailed it as the dawn of true accountability. Others warned it was the beginning of a war between the public and the police. But for Maya's mother, holding a framed photo of her daughter as cameras swarmed, there was only one truth. Nothing will bring her back. But maybe, just maybe, this will stop the next one from happening. The verdict and sentence sent shockwaves far beyond the state lines. By nightfall, the news dominated every channel, every trending feed, every political talk show. Some hailed it as the civil rights verdict of the century. Others called it a miscarriage of justice, claiming an innocent man was sacrificed to appease public anger. Officer unions held emergency meetings. Civil rights groups announced rallies to push for similar statutes nationwide. Law schools began adding the trial to their criminal justice curriculum before the ink on the judgment was even dry. In the midst of the noise, Keaton sat alone in a gray-walled holding cell, awaiting transfer to death row. The clang of the steel door behind him was like the punctuation mark on the life he had known. For the first time since the shooting, there was no lawyer, no camera, no crowd, just the steady hum of the fluorescent lights and the memory of the girl in the yellow coat. The appeal came quickly. His attorneys argued that Judge Daniels should have recused himself entirely, claiming bias so profound it violated Keaton's right to a fair trial. They pointed to Daniels' public role as Maya's father, his visible emotion during testimony, his history of speaking against racial bias in policing. The state's Supreme Court agreed to hear the appeal not because they were certain of bias, but because the sentence was unprecedented. No police officer in U.S. history had ever faced the death penalty for an on-duty shooting. The hearings drew crowds almost as large as the original trial. Protesters and counter-protesters camped on the courthouse steps. Inside, the legal arguments clashed like steel on steel. "Your Honors," Keaton's lawyer pleaded, "this is not about condoning what happened. This is about ensuring the integrity of our system. If we allow a man to be sentenced to death by the father of the victim, what precedent are we setting?" The state countered fiercely. This was a lawful appointment made in the absence of precedent. The defense had every opportunity to object before trial. They chose not to, because they believed they could win. They lost, and the evidence supports every inch of this verdict. After weeks of deliberation, the Supreme Court issued its ruling. The conviction stood. The sentence stood. The night that ruling was announced, a candlelight vigil for Maya filled the courthouse lawn. Hundreds gathered, holding photos, signs, and each other. Judge Daniels stood at the edge of the crowd, unrobed, unguarded, just a father among mourners. A young girl, maybe 10, approached him, clutching a picture she had drawn. It showed Maya with angel wings, standing between two children of different races, holding their hands. "She helped me once," the girl whispered. "At school. Some kids were mean to me. She told me I was worth something." Daniels felt his throat close. He knelt down, taking the picture like it was made of glass. "She would have liked you," he said. Meanwhile, Keaton's case became a symbol on both sides of the divide. Activists pointed to it as proof that the system could work if laws were enforced equally. Police organizations called it a dangerous precedent that would make officers hesitate in life-or-death situations, potentially costing lives. In truth, the reality was messier. Across the country, cases of police shootings continued, but juries were changing. Prosecutors began to pursue charges they would have once avoided. Officers thought twice before reaching for their weapons in situations that weren't truly threatening. Some cities adopted the Maya statute, modeled after the law that sealed Keaton's fate. Others rejected it outright, calling it politically motivated. Keaton's execution date was set for 5 years later, in the spring. In those years, appeals came and went, but the outcome never changed. Daniels never attended another execution in his jurisdiction until that day. The prison was quiet when he arrived, the kind of quiet that settles in places where finality lives. Keaton was let in, thinner now, his hair more gray than blonde. He did not look at Daniels. The warden asked if either man had final words. Keaton's voice was rough. "I wish I could take it back. I don't expect forgiveness." Daniels said nothing for a long time. Then, "It's not about forgiveness. It's about stopping this from happening again." The injection was administered. Keaton exhaled once, sharply, and was gone. Afterward, Daniels drove to the cemetery alone. Maya's grave was still marked with fresh flowers from strangers. He sat beside it as the sun set, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass. "I don't know if this was justice," he said quietly. "But I hope it was enough to make them think before they pull the trigger next time." He stayed until the sky turned to ink, then rose, brushing dirt from his suit. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of protest still echoed, but here, among the graves, there was only stillness. Years later, law students would study State versus Keaton as the case that changed everything or nothing, depending on who was telling the story. Politicians would invoke it in speeches. Documentaries would dissect every frame of the body cam footage. But for Judge Samuel Daniels, it was not a case. It was a hole in the world where his daughter should have been. And no verdict, no sentence, no change in law could ever fill it. Still, when another young black woman graduated from law school carrying a scholarship in Maya's name, Daniels allowed himself a rare smile. Because maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of justice Maya would have wanted all along. That was the end not of the fight, but of one chapter in a story America still hadn't finished writing. And maybe never would. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.